On this map of the Pacific Ocean, at the bottom, just to the east of Australia, is New Zealand. Most of New Zealand is contained in two islands, the North Island and the South Island. We landed at one of the largest cities, Auckland, in the North Island. A used car dealer picked us up at the airport and drove us to his small operation. We had arranged, before arriving, to buy a used car from him on the condition that he would buy it back from us at a fixed price when we left. Having our own car provided great flexibility, and this arrangement was much cheaper than renting a car or even buying bus tickets for the two of us. Typically, we'd not make reservations for the night in advance. We rarely knew where we'd be that night. Most of the time, we got good accommodations at a bed and breakfast. The first day, we made a quick sightseeing trip in downtown Auckland and then drove up to an overlook point. The harbor was easily visible. Lots of New Zealanders sail. The overlook point was on the brim of one of the many, now defunct, volcanoes in the region. Fortunately, there was no sign of any imminent activity. Next, we visited a museum which featured native New Zealand culture, the Maori culture. It was an easy way to get an up-close view and to learn something about the meaning of their carvings.
Now, the name of this whare.
Their war canoes really impressed me. They are large, huge. 100 warriors could sit inside and row these monsters. Then, at the very end of the day, I went to the city zoo just before it closed, hoping to get to see the bird that New Zealand is famous for, the kiwi. All I saw was a drawing. Back at our B&B, there were low doorways. After hitting my head several times, I hung a few low, long strips of tape to alert me. We wanted to see some of the unique wildlife in New Zealand, so the next day we took a tour out to a small island. The activities here were controlled to provide its nature to flourish. They even had a wet bar on board the tour boat going out. The island has a small staff of park rangers and conservationists.
Morning.
It's famous for its birds. We all came prepared with our cameras and binoculars.
Sign, we're a scientific reserve, and so there are a few special things that you need to note while you're here today. The most important one being, please will you stay on the tracks?
So then we started walking. This bird with a white neck is a tui, I think. As we walked along the path, I stopped often to listen to the bird songs, which were very strange songs to me. I couldn't see many of the birds that I heard. I did get some video of this little fellow emitting his sound. Some moved away as quickly as I got them in my camera. This fellow didn't seem to mind my presence at all. I think it's a taka. Then I saw it kind of doing a mating thing, which ended up in a fight. I didn't understand what was going on. Our time was limited, our boat returned, and we had to leave the birds that seemed so unfamiliar to me that I considered them exotic. The trip back to the mainland was uneventful. It had been a wonderfully educational day. New Zealand is a fascinating place. For example, it has many waterfalls. Because New Zealand is made up of islands, there are lots of beaches. And depending on the time of year, there are flowers blooming everywhere. And every port offers boat excursions of one type or another, in good weather and in gloomy weather. These boat excursions provide a quick way to see the topography of the New Zealand coastline. And then there's the wildlife to be seen. These are penguins. On this boat excursion, the high point of the visit was to a hole in the rock island. I was really surprised when our boat drove right through the tunnel, right through the hole. But to me, the best parts of New Zealand are its nature trails, through marvelous-looking vegetation. These trails are mostly flat and easy-going in the North Island. This trail ended up in a classic mangrove growth. Mangroves are plants that are essential to holding the soil in place in swampy, tidal, ocean water areas. The vegetation and water provide habitat for birds like the pied stilt and the branded rail. And it's home to shrimp. The mangrove tree has main roots that extend outward away from the main trunk, and then they have shoots which come up from these roots, and they go through the surface. And here's the tree trunk with the shoots surrounding it. Shorebirds love this environment. Here's a cormorant on its nest. And there are flowers here, too. But as I said before, I really liked the hiking trails, which were well maintained and generally were easy. And the trails often brought you to some interesting sights. This is another waterfall. I rarely saw other hikers on these trails. And I did see wildlife. Is this the banded rail? I don't know the name of this bird. Here's another interesting bird. Is a taka? Many people visit New Zealand for its beaches. There are all variations of beach here, and most of them are desolate. We visited a lighthouse one foggy afternoon. It was high up from the ocean and a long way from home. I particularly like to get out on a long, wide, flat beach and drive the car at a fast speed down the beach. Pretty exciting. Now, it can also be exciting driving just on a regular road in New Zealand. The road can be occupied by all kinds of obstacles. We took a boat ride out to see dolphins several times. These are bottle-nosed dolphins and are almost 12 feet long. That's 4 meters long. Typically, they swim in groups.
They're in problems, they stick together. Usually the bottlenose will hang out in groups of up to around 30.
It was hard for me to guess where to point the camera when they were going to surface to breathe. Our hope was to be able to swim with the dolphins.
Head under the water. All right?
Oh, fun!
Okay.
They're coming,
The boat supplied flippers.
How's the temperature?
Oh!
Unfortunately, the dolphins went on about fishing and left the area. The waters of the ocean gave way to waters in rivers and waterfalls on land. The New Zealanders love outdoor activities, like kayaking here. Back on the road, we encountered lovely paved highways. I was surprised at how little traffic there was. The scenery was splendid. It was spring down under. The flowers were in bloom. We kept looking for short hikes we could take. This trail led to a huge tree, almost as big around as the sequoia trees in California. I loved this lush, tropical forest-like growth. Many of the birds here seemed fearless. The silhouette of the ferns attracted my camera's attention. We walked out and then drove back out to the ocean, to the coastline. We visited some cliffs near the Miriawi Bank. Here there were several colonies of Australian gannets. Their nesting area was on bare rock. They are beautiful in flight. To fish, they dive at high speed into the water. They reach maturity at about 5 years of age. They have monogamous, long-term relationships. This is a courtship and greeting display. They lay only one egg. Their population is growing. Most of their colonies are on offshore islands. Our next stop was the heavily advertised glowworm caves. It was dark in these caves and no photography was allowed. These are limestone caves with stalactites and stalagmites. The next day, we took a tour to Rotorua.
And I'll be your host for this evening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I belong to one of the 36 sub-tribes we have here in Rotorua, the Ngāti Tuhorangi Wāhio tribe, and my people once lived on the shores of Lake Tarawera.
First, we were treated to a welcome ceremony. Then they performed some Maori entertainment. In the end, I was dragged up on stage to participate. Then we were served a multi-course meal cooked mostly in the native way. It was a real feast. This had been a memorable afternoon and evening. The next day, we drove toward the thermal zone of Rotorua, again noting bird life when we could. We took several walks that day through interesting vegetation and hiked to the shores of a lake. Lots of nature to observe. And we did still another trail. We had the trails mostly to ourselves. One of the trails, as I said, ended at the banks of a lake. We studied maps to decide what to do each day. I really liked this plant. More marvelous trails and sights to see. The area near Rotorua is famous for its thermal activity, much like that found in Yellowstone National Park in the United States.
We'll eventually pick you up there.
The area had displays of Maori architecture. Some had been recently painted and looked fake to me. Our guide explained the importance of the carvings in the Maori culture. Again, I was impressed with the war canoes. The thermal area was easy to cover on foot. It did remind me of Yellowstone. There were geysers going off at regular intervals.
Wasn't going that.
There were bubbling mud pools. There was steam coming out of the rocks with a sulfur-like smell. This was their biggest geyser. The North Island has some fast-moving rivers. We went looking for the tallest volcanoes to photograph before leaving the North Island. Unfortunately, the tops were covered with clouds. Before leaving the North Island, we ran across some activity on a sheep ranch. These two men were shearing the sheep. I found it fascinating to watch the process. I was surprised at how docile the sheep were while they were being shorn of their wool.
The animals aren't sedated. They're just really docile anyway.
He has about 1,000 sheep. And he shears them all himself, so he doesn't do it all at, I asked him how many days it took, and he said, well, it'd probably take him about a month because he just would round up a few and then come back and do those and then go catch some more. The two that were in the pen are females, but they did not have lambs, so their udders have dried up, so he's going to sell those.
So now you.
One downside to our buying a used car was it really wasn't in good condition. The trunk leaked when it rained. I tried to find the leaks and then plug them with rubber glue. Eventually, I won the battle. We visited a bird sanctuary. We were able to get up close and personal with many species.
Gray teal.
It's the gray teal.
Our stay on the North Island was coming to an end. We drove to the ferry dock area in the town of Wellington. Because the country of New Zealand is divided into two major islands, there is regular traffic by ferry between the North and the South Islands. The fare for one person and a car is about $75, and the fare for one adult only is about $50. The trip by ferry is about 60 miles in distance and takes 3.5 hours. Now, this completes part 1 of our 2-part video on our trip driving through New Zealand. To view part 2, the South Island, go to the YouTube search box and enter Franklin Clay Films New Zealand.